The shock registered first in my fingertips, tiny needles of ice spreading upward through my arms as my mother's words hung in the air between us. "You're dead to me now." Her voice was clinical, detached, the same tone she might use to dismiss an incompetent housekeeper. I pressed my palm against my rounded 7-month pregnant belly, feeling my baby shift beneath my touch as my mother continued. "You're out of the will. I want nothing to do with you or that." Her gaze dropped to my stomach, disgust twisting her perfect features. "That child." The Christmas tree lights behind her pulsed in rhythmic patterns, red, green, gold, illuminating the family portrait above the mantel, all of us smiling, a lie captured in expensive photography. My father stared fixedly at his newspaper while my brother Michael smirked from the couch, his fingers never pausing on his phone screen. 3 heartbeats passed before I reached into my purse with steady hands. I removed the elegantly wrapped package I'd prepared, heavy cream paper with a gold satin bow, and placed it precisely on the antique coffee table between us. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said, my voice sounding strangely distant to my own ears. Then I stood, turned, and walked out of the home I'd grown up in, the mahogany door clicking softly closed behind me with devastating finality. "My name is Olivia, I'm 28 and a registered nurse. This is the story of how I replaced a family bound by blood with one bound by love. For most of my life I'd fulfilled the role expected of me, the perfect daughter of old Portland money. My grandfather had built Anderson Timber into an empire during the 1950s, and my mother, Elizabeth, treated that legacy like a royal bloodline rather than fortunate circumstance. She moved through life categorizing people by their usefulness to her social standing, acceptable connections, valuable contacts, and disposable nobodies. I met Anthony 3 years ago while working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. He came in after a minor motorcycle accident, nothing serious, just road rash that needed cleaning and bandaging. Unlike the carefully curated men my mother had paraded before me at country club functions, Anthony didn't see me as a stepping stone to wealth or arm candy for business dinners. He asked about my day, laughed at my terrible jokes, and treated me like a person rather than a pedigree. He was a tattoo artist with ambition to open his own studio, had long dark hair tied back in a neat bun, and came from a working-class Filipino-American family. When my mother first met him, I watched her categorize him instantly, disposable nobody. That first Sunday dinner was excruciating. My mother spent 3 courses interrogating Anthony about his financial planning and retirement strategy. My father punctuated the meal with pointed comments about motorcycle fatality statistics. Meanwhile, Michael, 25 years old and still living in our parents' basement, watched the spectacle with thinly veiled amusement, occasionally interjecting questions about Anthony's career goals as if unemployment weren't his own primary occupation. Through it all, Anthony remained unfailingly polite, answering each invasive question honestly, complimenting my mother's cooking, and even finding common ground with my father over vintage motorcycles. But I could see the calculation happening behind my mother's eyes. This man wasn't the investment banker or surgeon she'd imagined when planning how to spend my future husband's money. After Anthony left, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Olivia, darling," she said while I loaded the dishwasher, "I'm sure he's nice enough, but we need to be realistic. What kind of life can a tattoo artist provide? What will people at the club think? What about college funds for children?" I reminded her that I had my own career and could contribute to our financial future. She dismissed my profession with a wave of her manicured hand. "Nursing is admirable, dear, but it's not a lifestyle. You need a husband who can support you properly." The criticism became relentless. Every phone call, every family gathering included subtle digs about my phase and when I'd settled down with someone appropriate. The true hypocrisy was that Michael, who had never kept a job longer than 6 months, received no such scrutiny. His idea of ambition was reaching the next level in whatever game currently occupied him. What I didn't know then was that my mother was secretly funding his entire lifestyle, information that would later expose the breathtaking duplicity behind her judgment of Anthony. The proposal happened unexpectedly on a random Tuesday evening. We were cooking dinner together in my downtown apartment when Anthony suddenly went quiet mid-story. When I looked up from chopping vegetables, he was kneeling beside me, holding a ring he'd designed himself. "Liv," he said softly. "I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" The ring wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. He'd incorporated both our birthstones into a design that symbolized our lives intertwining. It was thoughtful, personal, and more meaningful than any generic diamond from a jewelry store. I said yes immediately. When I called my parents to share the news, my mother went completely silent for 10 excruciating seconds before launching into a prepared speech about how I was throwing away my potential. My father suggested a long engagement to be sure, and even Michael offered unsolicited wisdom about marriage being a big step. This from a man whose longest relationship had lasted precisely 3 weeks since high school. We married 6 months later in a simple ceremony surrounded by Anthony's warm, welcoming family and our closest friends. My parents attended but sat stone-faced throughout the celebration. My mother refused to smile in a single photograph, her disapproval captured permanently in our wedding album. 6 months after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Anthony and I had planned to wait a year or two before starting a family, but life had other plans. We were thrilled, if slightly nervous about the timing. I decided to tell my parents in person, believing, naively, that becoming grandparents might soften their attitude toward Anthony. My mother's reaction was worse than I could have imagined. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask about due dates or names. Instead, she immediately calculated how this would affect the family's reputation. Would people think I had to get married? The fact that we'd been married for 6 months seemed irrelevant to her. Then she said something unforgivable. "Olivia, you know there are other options you should consider. This doesn't have to define your future." She was suggesting I terminate my wanted pregnancy because the father didn't meet her social standards. I left immediately, but the damage was irreparable. The months leading to Christmas became increasingly tense. My mother stopped including me in family gatherings. Michael sent occasional mocking texts about how parenthood would destroy my freedom. Only my father would reach out with brief messages asking how I was feeling, but even those seemed half-hearted. As Christmas approached, I made a decision. I would give my mother one final chance to choose love over pride, family over reputation. And I would prepare for the likelihood she would fail that test. So while I wrapped a beautiful Christmas present for her, I also prepared something else: comprehensive documentation of exactly who Elizabeth Anderson really was behind her charitable facade. I had no idea how soon I'd need it. Christmas morning arrived crisp and bright. Anthony offered to accompany me, but I told him this was something I needed to do alone. He kissed my forehead and promised to support whatever happened next. I drove through familiar Portland streets, holiday decorations blurring past my window, the carefully wrapped gift resting on the passenger seat. Part of me still hoped for a miracle, that maternal instinct might override snobbery, that the sight of her pregnant daughter would trigger something human in her. The house looked perfect as always. My mother answered the door dressed immaculately, her expression carefully neutral. My father sat in his usual leather chair pretending to read the newspaper. Michael sprawled on the couch, absorbed in his phone. "Merry Christmas," I said, settling into the armchair I'd occupied countless times before. My mother offered coffee, which I declined because of the pregnancy. That seemed to irritate her, this visible reminder of my condition. We made stilted small talk about weather and traffic for a few minutes before I gathered my courage. "I wanted to tell you in person that you're going to be grandparents," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "The baby is due in late February. We are very happy, and we hope you'll want to be part of your grandchild's life." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face cycled through several expressions: shock, disgust, calculation, before settling on cold fury. "I don't want you or that bastard in this family," she said, her voice like breaking ice. "You're dead to me and out of the will. You've made your choices, Olivia. Now live with them." My father stared fixedly at his newspaper. Michael actually laughed. And that's when I truly knew, what my family was. 3 heartbeats passed before I reached into my purse with steady hands, removed the elegantly wrapped package, and placed it on the coffee table. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said quietly. Then I walked out, not looking back. I didn't cry until I reached my car. Then I sobbed so hard I had to pull over 3 blocks away. After composing myself enough to drive safely, I continued the 20-minute journey home to our apartment, where Anthony was waiting. What my mother didn't know was what that innocent-looking Christmas box contained. Inside was a USB drive loaded with documentation I'd spent months gathering. Financial records showing irregular withdrawals from the family accounts. My medical records documenting stress-related health issues that began precisely when I started dating Anthony. Emails and text messages showing her manipulation and emotional abuse. But the real bomb was the copy of my grandfather's revised will. 6 months before he died, my grandfather had changed his estate planning. He'd watched my mother's treatment of me with growing disgust. In his final will, he left the bulk of his personal fortune, separate from the business holdings my parents controlled, directly to me, explicitly bypassing my mother. She'd never known because the lawyer who executed the estate had kept that portion confidential per my grandfather's instructions, only to be revealed if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was my mother attempting to disinherit me. During my months of preparation, I'd contacted my grandfather's attorney explaining the situation, and he had provided me with the sealed documentation as instructed in my grandfather's final wishes. Along with the documentation was a handwritten letter composed during the quiet hours of my hospital night shifts, detailing everything: how her rejection had affected my health during pregnancy, how I'd tried to build bridges while she burned them, how I was done trying to earn love from someone who made approval conditional on compliance. And how, as of that moment, she was completely blocked from my life. I drove home to Anthony, who held me while I cried. Then we made hot chocolate, sat by our small Christmas tree, and talked about the family we were building, one based on genuine love instead of social performance. 3 days later, my mother's lawyer called. She'd opened the present. Our daughter Sophia was born in early February, healthy and perfect. Anthony cut the umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face. His parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the hospital waiting room with flowers, balloons, and genuine joy. The family I'd married into celebrated our daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. My biological family sent nothing. I blocked all their numbers and focused on my new life. Anthony's tattoo shop thrived. I returned to work part-time at St. Mary's Hospital and was promoted to charge nurse 6 months later. We saved up for a down payment and, with help from Anthony's parents, bought a small house in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools. Sophia was surrounded by love from grandparents who actually showed up, who babysat without conditions, who celebrated every milestone. Meanwhile, my mother tried repeatedly to make contact. She called St. Mary's Hospital and went through my supervisor, claiming I was having postpartum mental health issues and needed intervention. She knew where I worked because I'd never changed hospitals since meeting Anthony there. My supervisor, Dr. Karen Foster, shut that down immediately and told me I was one of the most level-headed new mothers she'd ever worked with. Then, when Sophia was 8 months old, Michael showed up at our house unannounced. He'd gotten our address from one of my former co-workers who didn't know about our family situation. He looked terrible, thinner, unshaven, wearing clothes that looked slept in. But what shocked me was his expression when he saw Sophia, pure wonder, followed immediately by what looked like grief. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks just like you did as a baby." "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, not inviting him in. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced," he said. That stopped me cold. My parents had been married for 32 years. The story emerged slowly. 2 weeks after Christmas, my father couldn't handle how my mother had treated me. They started fighting constantly. Then during divorce proceedings in April, my father discovered something. My mother had been secretly giving Michael $43,000 over 2 years, money she told Dad was for household expenses and charity donations. $43,000 to fund Michael's entire lifestyle while she lectured everyone about financial responsibility. While I worked double shifts to pay for nursing school. While she rejected Anthony for being financially unsuitable. The hypocrisy was staggering. "She's been stalking you," Michael added quietly. "She hired a private investigator to get photos of you and Sophia. She has a whole scrapbook. It's honestly disturbing." I got a restraining order the next day, using Michael's testimony as evidence of her concerning behavior. But Michael surprised me. He got his own apartment, found steady employment, and slowly proved he'd actually changed. He became the uncle Sophia deserved, showing up consistently, respecting boundaries, never sharing information with our mother. My father reached out once through a lawyer, asking to meet his granddaughter. After careful consideration, I declined. Too much damage had been done. I sent a formal response through my own attorney making it clear that the door was permanently closed. A year after that Christmas morning, Anthony and I renewed our vows on Sophia's first birthday, surrounded by people who had actually supported us. As we promised to keep choosing each other every day, I looked at our small but genuine gathering and felt complete. The little girl my mother had rejected now had a family who would never question her worth. Sometimes the greatest gift is discovering you don't need the people who never truly valued you. If you've ever had to choose yourself over toxic family, you're not alone. The family we choose often heals what the family we are born into breaks.